Hey guys, welcome back for another video. It's Danielle, and in this one I'm going to be showing you guys how I made over the infamous buffet cabinet. I know it's only infamous to me, but you guys have heard me talk about this cabinet a few different times in other videos, so I finally got this video done for you guys, and I'm showing you how I took this cabinet from how it looks now to how it ended up turning out in the end. And I got this cabinet off of Craigslist. It was $50. It's about 42 inches. It has 3 drawers, 2 cabinets, and it also has a wine rack. And the wine rack is removable, and I'm going to remove it because I don't need a wine rack. I have a wine rack like this in my kitchen as well as one on the wall in my dining room. So my plan initially was not to design my own buffet cabinet. It was to go online and find one to buy. And what I ended up finding was this cabinet that I saw on Wayfair, but it was $555, and I didn't really want to spend that much on just one piece of furniture, especially one that wasn't really a staple and was more of a decorative piece. So I went hunting on Craigslist to see what I could find, and then I ended up finding this cabinet, and I felt like I could transform it into something very similar to the one that was on Wayfair. So I decided to just go for it. The first step for me to redesign this cabinet was to go and get some wood from Home Depot, and I found this wood, which is Poplar. The dimensions are 1/4 inch by 1.5 inches by 4 feet, and that was actually perfect. So I decided to buy 2 of those, and then I got to work cutting the wood. I had this little cutting box thing, I don't know what this is called, but it gives you 45 and 90 degree angles. So I used the 45-degree angle as well as the saw to create the wood pieces. So once I cut off that first 45-degree angle, then I put the piece of wood up to the cabinet door and then measured from one end to the other. And then I marked off that measurement and used that marking to figure out where to actually cut the wood to make all those pieces. And then I just did that 15 more times until I had all 16 of those little pieces. And honestly, that took me about a week because it took forever to do it by hand. And then once I got all of those pieces cut, I did the unnecessary step of taking off the drawer fronts. I don't know why I did that. And then I also took off all the hardware and laid the cabinet down so that I could start to place the pieces of wood that I cut inside the cabinet. I did have to measure each of these pieces out as far as which section they went into, but by the time I got to actually putting them on the cabinet, they had already been messed with by my daughter, so I had to go back and figure out which ones went where. So that's what I'm doing here. At this point, I really liked the way that it was turning out, so it was time to move on to the next step. So I got out my Gorilla wood glue, and then I started to glue down the first piece, but then I realized that I needed to sand down the area under these slats so that I wouldn't have to try to do it after they were already installed. So that's what I'm doing here. Then it was time to start measuring to figure out how much space should go in between each one. So after I did the math, it turned out that it should be about 1 3/4 inch between each of those little slats. So then I just used a ruler to make sure that all of them were evenly placed. Then it was finally time to start gluing all of them down, so I made sure to keep my ruler handy so that I could ensure that there was exactly 1 3/4 inch between each one as I glued them down. When I got to the second side, rather than measuring all over again, I placed them as close to the first side as possible and used my ruler to make sure that they were square. And then I just had to repeat that entire process on the second door. I let the glue dry overnight, and the next day I was able to sand up the cabinet. And in order to start the sanding process, I decided to remove the doors and the hardware so that I could get to all those crevices easier. And then it was time to start sanding, so I grabbed my sheet sander with 80 grit sandpaper, and then I went over the entire cabinet with the sander. If you want yours to have a more smooth finish than mine had, then you can definitely use a higher grit sandpaper like 120 or 220. But I wanted mine to be a little bit roughed up because I wanted it to look more rustic. But you can definitely choose your sandpaper based on how you want the finished product to look. Now that we have it completely sanded down to the bare wood, it's time to wipe the cabinet down. I just took a wet rag and wiped off all the sawdust because there was a lot of it that had accumulated on the cabinet. And then once I finished wiping everything down, it was time to pre-treat the wood. So I went in with the Minwax pre-stained wood conditioner and I applied that to the entire cabinet. So the directions for this product said to let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes and then wipe off the excess, but I didn't really have any excess. The wood kind of soaked it all up. So the next step was to obviously let it dry for 10 to 15 minutes and then to go back in with the stain. So I chose to use the Weathered Oak stain by Verathane, and that is what I applied to the entire cabinet. One thing that I did notice though was that I took a straw to stir it up initially and I thought that was enough, but you'll see that it's just really a light coat once I'm applying it to the cabinet. So then I went back in and stirred it up with the actual like spoon because I didn't have a stir. And when I did that, it was really, the color was way more vibrant and you could really see the gray. So definitely use a paint stirrer, not a straw. So this is what it was looking like after I did 2 or 3 coats of stain. You can really see the gray tones, but you can also see the natural color of the wood and the grain of it still peeking through, and that's exactly what I wanted. So I was very happy with the way that this turned out. But I wasn't done yet. So once I finished admiring my work, I went ahead and moved on to the doors. We are finally in the home stretch, so now that I'm completely done staining everything, it's time to move on to the finishing touches. So I'm going to use these staining pads that I got from Home Depot, as well as the Minwax paste finishing wax, and I'm just going to rub that all over the entire cabinet just to get a smooth finish and a slight sheen. So you have to let this wax dry for a little while, and then you come back with a clean rag and you wipe off all the excess wax. And that's how you get that really smooth finish, because it's kind of sticky before you do this step. So that's what I'm doing here. And now it's time for the fun part. I have all of my hardware. I ended up buying new knobs, but I kept everything else the same. So I got these from Lowe's, and then I also got some flat black spray paint. And then I just took everything outside and spray painted everything black. I ended up doing 2 coats of spray paint, and then once I let those dry for an hour or two, it was finally time to put the cabinet back together. And trust me, this process was so long. I was so happy when I was able to finally start finishing up with it and putting everything back together and seeing how everything turned out. I was super excited because I really worked hard on this cabinet, and I'm really proud of how it turned out in the end. I wanted to give you guys some close-up shots of the hardware once it was completely done being painted, and then this is just me putting it all back on the cabinet. So now that all the hardware is back on, do you remember that wine rack that I took out? It left these little indentations in the shelf in the middle, so I have to fill that in. I just took some plastic wood and I had to build it up to get it completely flush, but once I did, then all I did was took a gray marker as opposed to using the stain. I just used a gray marker, and then I just went in and colored it just to match the color of the wood on the actual shelf. So I just colored all the little areas that had any of the plastic wood on it, and then I sanded it down with a sander, and that was it. So here is what the cabinet turned out looking like. I absolutely love the way that it turned out. I'm so proud of myself for actually sticking with this project and seeing it through to the end. It took me, like I said, about 2 weeks from start to finish to make over this cabinet, but it was completely worth it in the end. And I think that I was able to accomplish my goal of creating something similar to my inspiration piece. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up because I worked really hard on it. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!